I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is James Corbett, publisher of theCorbettReport.com and editorial writer for the International Forecaster. He's speaking to us from Japan. Welcome to the show, James.
Thanks for having me back on. Always a pleasure to be here.
Has China turned things around? We hear their exports were up 11.5% in March, year to year, the first improvement in 9 months. Are they really getting better?
Not as much as you would think so from a story like that. It sounds very impressive until you start looking at the way that this they calculate this. Of course, we're talking year on year, so we're comparing March this year to March last year, and just the way that the Chinese Lunar New Year lined up this year versus last year, it gives a bit of a false sense because, of course, China basically shuts down for a few days, a week around Lunar New Year, and that took place during the Lunar New Year last year. That feeds into what was happening in March 2015 as opposed to March 2016. So it's a bit of smoke and mirrors. There isn't as much of a jump as that would indicate. And it's funny, the way that this is being reported, Reuters and elsewhere, I've seen the headlines. For example, the Reuters headline, China's jump in export soothes growth fears and boosts markets. And yes, the markets are being boosted, but you only have to read a few paragraphs into that before they start saying, well, actually it's not so much of a boost, but people are still excited about it. So I think it's more of a reflection of people grasping at straws to try to find a bright spot, a silver lining in the gray clouds. I don't think the lining is actually that silver.
Is there a big reaction in Japan to the Panama Papers?
There has been. There's been reporting of it, certainly. I think it's not as big a story here as it is in some of the countries that have been more directly affected, like Iceland. But I think we've seen a lot more of it in the Western press. But certainly it is an international story, and people are interested in it. I think this is really more aimed specifically at the signatories to a 2014 document called the MCAA, the Multilateral Competent Authority Agreement, I believe it was, that was signed between 51 nations at the 2014 Berlin Tax Conference. This is an agreement that's supposed to start to form a tax sharing and information sharing grid between the signatories, mostly the OECD nations, as a way to combat those evil corporations and people that are putting their money offshore. And I think what we're seeing with the Panama Papers propaganda that's rolling out right now is that it's becoming a big push for, what can we do to shut down these tax havens? We need some sort of global agreement. Hey, there's already one on the table. So I think all of the member nations of the MCAA, which actually I think is expanded to 80 nations that are going to be coming online with it by, I believe, 2018. I think those are the real targets of this rollout. And Japan is one of the signatories. All of the major tax havens are signatories to this, British Virgin Islands, Seychelles, Bermuda, Cayman Islands, except for the notable holdout, Panama. Panama had not signed on to the MCAA, and there's been a lot of arm twisting going on at the international level to get them involved with it. I think this is definitely going to increase that diplomatic pressure, and it's very likely we're going to see Panama forced to sign on to this agreement. And basically what the agreement does is force in all of the signatories to share all of the individual bank account data of anyone who has any taxable income of various categories, including interest income and whatever else, amongst all of the signatory nations. It's basically the formation of a giant tax data sharing database grid that's going into place right now, and it's been happening quietly behind the scenes. I think we're going to hear a lot more about it in the coming weeks as the Pentagon Papers starts to roll out. So Japan is one of the signatories to the MCAA, and I think so it's important here that way. The other big holdout, other than Panama, is, interestingly enough, the United States. Yes, the U.S. is in fact becoming the world's tax haven. And there's been some even mainstream reporting about this, even from Bloomberg earlier this year, talking about Rothschild Trust North American Management, whatever it is, the LLC that they've set up in Reno, Nevada. And they had their spokesman in San Francisco delivering a speech last year saying that, yeah, the U.S. is becoming the tax haven for the world. So I think this is really the direction that the Panama Papers are rolling out in. And so that propaganda, I think, is rolling out amongst all the signatory nations to this agreement.
International terrorism after the attacks in Paris and Belgium. Has Japan expressed concerns about the same kind of thing happening there?
They certainly have. They are explicitly on the hit list for ISIS, whatever kind of official hit list there is, because of their support, at the very least for their support for the fight against ISIS, monetary support. Obviously not military support, but monetary support. So they are on the hit list, so to speak, and Japan has always made a big show about being very fully on board with the war on terror narrative, and a big supporter of the U.S., of course, who is really the proxy controller of Japan's military and security actions in the Asia-Pacific. So I think that they're very much concerned about it. They've implemented all of the types of security procedures that have been implemented elsewhere have been implemented here, including fingerprinting and digitally photographing every single visitor to the country, so that they have those records and can compare them and all of that. So it's very much on board with that, and I think we're seeing the same types of security theater being rolled out in Japan as elsewhere in the Western world.
One security expert I talked to suggested we need a lot more sniffer dogs to find bombs and guns, because he said checkpoints where you have people line up to have their documents checked are actually targets for these people. So the thing is, have these dogs and their handlers wander around, and that's the way to actually catch them before they can do anything major.
Yes, exactly right. I mean, if they were serious about the security aspects of this, I think there would be a lot of differences. And this has been proven time and time again over the last decade and a half, where TSA is constantly testing itself and tested by other agencies, seeing if people can smuggle guns and weapons in through the metal detectors and what have you. And they repeatedly fail. They repeatedly let weapons in still, even after 9/11. So there are serious problems with the security as it exists right now. But I think that the main point of security like this is the theater aspect of it, to make people feel like there is security going on, so that they feel comfortable, and so that, that will deter at least some of the people who might try something. But you're right. I mean, there are much more rational and much more effective ways to implement security, if that was the main concern here.
What about things like the invention of the cell phone gun? It looks like a cell phone, but it's a two-shot gun. Is that making security people feel any easier?
Well, yes, I'm sure it makes their job much more difficult. But there are a lot of such things that are coming to fruition right now. I mean, we've seen 3D printed guns where most of the components now are plastic. So, I mean, that's obviously going to make things a lot more difficult, and I think there's always a technological race between the development of new forms of weaponry and the development of new forms of ways of detecting that weaponry. I'm sure that race has been going on for a very long time, so nothing particularly new there. But yes, there are definitely some new technologies and new ways of doing things that are going to change what we think of as security, and maybe just stepping through a metal detector isn't exactly the way to do it anymore. But of course, what's the other alternative to this? And we have the backscatter radiation devices that'll, fry you in order to look at your naked body, and even then, those systems can be gamed as well. So I think that the real underlying point of this is there's no 100% ironclad security unless, I guess, just everyone strips off naked and gets, strip searched every single time they've traveled on an airplane. Obviously, that's not going to happen. So I think ultimately we can't ever have 100% security, and I'm not sure that's something that people would ultimately want, given the types of invasive security procedures that would be necessary to even approach that type of figure.
Yeah, I know. One of the nightmares is that these terrorists would have explosives implanted internally. How do you detect those?
I don't want to even venture to guess, but I'm sure, that's, that whatever the way of detecting that they're going to come up with is, they're already thinking about.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after the break.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, AMY, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Unbelievable harmony, spectacular performance, the ultimate tribute to the Everly Brothers and Simon and Garfunkel. Bird Dog and the Vintage Electric Band coming to West Vancouver Friday, May 6th at the K-Meek Center. Buy online and save at ontourtickets.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with James Corbett in Japan. James, how are the Asian stock markets doing right now?
Well, as we were talking about earlier, things have received a bit of a boost from the latest China export growth numbers. But again, as we say, there's not a lot of economic productivity underlying it. So if you're just looking at the markets are up. But I think we have to take into account what's really happening underneath that.
My people are telling me gold is in a wonderful position right now where you could quadruple your profits with the right kind of stock purchases of junior miners.
Yes, mining stocks look like they're going to be the big winners out of the market as it exists right now, because again, the price has come down over the last couple of years to a point where we are likely to start. We've seen a lot of the weaker miners getting shaken out of the market. And we've got a lot of growth potential for stocks. So there is definitely, for people who know how to play that game, there is definitely some upside potential there. And then other people are pointing to the almost record level disparity in the gold-silver ratio as saying that silver definitely has room to grow here. So there's definitely some smart moves that could be made right now in order to capitalize on what looks like is going to be the next leg of the rally for precious metals.
I know when the price of oil started to plunge, some people said, well, because consumers will be paying less for gasoline, they'll spend that money in other goods. Has that really shaken out that way?
Not that we can see from the data. I mean, it plays out differently in different economies around the world, obviously, but a lot of this has been counterintuitive to the types of things that people say. I mean, people often will say that the falling oil price is good for the economy to a certain point, but then once it cuts too far, it hurts. I think it all depends on the regional economy and how much dependent that is on the oil sector. So, I mean, try telling anyone in Calgary right now that the falling oil price is a good thing. I said I don't think you're going to receive a lot of a positive response to that. But then there are places like Japan where it's heavily dependent on imports of natural gas and oil, so there are benefits to the economy here from it. Again, it's a mixed bag, but I think ultimately the idea that this is going to spur some sort of consumer spending spree, I think, has not played out in really anywhere in the globe at this point.
What's the fallout been in Japan from negative interest rates?
The fallout has been certainly nothing that they were hoping for, and ultimately not that much. Japan, right now, the IMF, I mean, take the IMF's projections for what they're worth, which is usually not that much, but right now the IMF is projecting that Japan will be the only advanced economy in the world that will actually shrink in 2017. So still absolutely moribund economy here, despite the negative rates. So it has been a colossal flop, and the worst part of it, really, at least from the Bank of Japan's perspective, is where else do you go from here? What do you do other than cut rates even more negative? There's not a lot that they can do now. It's just easing and cutting rates. And once those two bazookas have been spent, to use a phrase, there's not a lot that they can do about this. So they really are between a rock and a hard place, especially because we are looking at another increase in the consumer tax rate here from 8% to 10%. They're looking to do that as early as April of next year, but people are now saying they're going to have to push that backward because there just is not a lot of retail spending going on at all right now, and that will only further hurt the economy.
A sales tax, in other words.
Yes, exactly. There is a consumption tax here on every sale. It was 5% a couple of years ago. They raised it to 8%. And as expected, retail spending went down after that raise in consumption tax, and now they're planning to raise it to 10%. But they've already delayed that by, I think, 6 months, and now they're thinking about toying with maybe the idea of perhaps pushing it back.
How do Japanese income taxes compare to other places in the world?
They're fairly low. Income tax here is fairly low. A lot of the tax is collected at the prefectural level and the local level. But in terms of income tax itself, it's fairly competitive. It's comparable to the United States.
Is there any talk there about the Chinese money fleeing to places like Vancouver real estate?
Well, yes. I mean, we've already seen that demonstrably happening, and I think we talked about the last time. We talked about the $2 million basically abandoned shack that's going in the Vancouver real estate market right now. And of course, those types of things are just fronts, just ways for wealthy Chinese to get their money out of China. So that trend is likely to continue. I don't think there's any particular break on that trend right now, especially as people brace for what could potentially be further devaluation of the yuan this year. I think that could be the big story of the year, depending when, if, and how they decide to devalue further. And that will only further put the pressure, even the expectation of it further puts the pressure on the growing wealthy middle or upper class in China to try to get their money out before that happens.
Any attention being paid to the Trump circus?
There is, actually. Of course, the Japanese reporting on it is mostly about the changes that would happen to the U.S.-Japan security agreement that have been proposed, and the idea that Trump has floated that Japan and South Korea should start producing their own nuclear umbrella. Why use the United States? Let's proliferate to Japan and South Korea, which is, I mean, a crazy idea in a lot of ways, of course, because it does mean proliferation, nuclear proliferation, and it puts further pressure on China to further expand their nuclear arsenal. So I don't think anyone will see that as a good thing. I personally don't expect that Trump is going to be able to even secure the nomination, but even if he does, I really don't think he'll win the general election. So I don't think it's something that we're going to have to face in the near term. But certainly the idea of rejiggering the U.S.-Japan security agreement and what that means for the Asia-Pacific region generally, let alone world security, is something of an open question. And something that is being recalculated right now, even if Trump doesn't get in.
Well, the post-war Japanese constitution forbids them from building a military for use outside the country. It's a self-defense force. Any worries that Japan could start building up its military because of this pressure?
Oh, absolutely. We're already seeing the beginnings of that. We've seen for the last decade, or even more than a decade at this point, a re-rise in the idea of Japanese patriotism and nationalism, which has been very much frowned upon in the post-war era. That, in fact, I mean, even displays of the flag and things like that have been discouraged in previous times because of that holdover from the imperial era, where people are quite embarrassed about. And Japan, of course, has become a very kind of peace-loving nation. There has been a concerted effort in the last decade or so to change that conception, that self-conception in the public's mind here. And as a result, we've started to see actual changes in the law. It started out with things like schools having to play the Japanese national anthem and display the flag and have everyone rise and face the flag, which there was brouhaha about. There were some teachers that refused to do it, and so they went to court about whether they had to do it or not, and it's been ruled they do have to follow that law. So those types of battles have been playing out, but more importantly, in the last couple of years, that's really ratcheted up under Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, where now we have not a change to the Constitution, but a reinterpretation of the Constitution, which does, as you say, limit the Japanese military to self-defense force. But they're now saying that self-defense doesn't necessarily mean if someone outside comes in and attacks Japan. It could be, well, if somebody attacks one of Japan's allies, then Japan can commit forces to help out, which doesn't seem like a very strong position to a lot of people. That seems like sort of normal and would be expected from a lot of countries. But here in Japan, that is a major move, and so those security laws have been very, very vigorously contested. There's been a lot of protest about this. Clearly, we are seeing a shift towards a more militarized Japan, and the public is just being eased into that at this point.
Yes, and of course, the Japanese aren't always told the truth about the history of World War II. I had Japanese friends ask me, why did they bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki? What did we do to deserve that?
Yes, well, of course, yes. I mean, there is a huge issue here. What is taught in the textbooks, how it is taught to the children, and it's a huge international issue, an issue in the Asia Pacific region, because that sort of educational those educational factors are closely watched and reported on in Korea and in China, of course, where they have their issues with Imperial Japan and what happened there. So that is a diplomatic entanglement that Japan is in. Every time there's a change to the Japanese curriculum, it gets debated and reported on in Korea, China, and other places like that. So it is a huge issue, and clearly there has been a lot of scrubbing of a lot of pieces of history from the average Japanese school child's curriculum here.
James, thanks a lot for chatting with us.
Thank you for having me on.
My guest has been James Corbett, publisher of thecorbettreport.com and editorial writer for the International Forecaster. He spoke to us from Japan. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Comments or questions for the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.